Hi everyone and welcome to this video. Today I am making a gluten-free lemon cake and I'm decorating it for a birthday party, so let's get started. To start off with my dry ingredients, I'm mixing together some gluten-free flour, baking powder, salt, sugar, and lemon zest. Next, I'm going to whip together my wet ingredients starting with 2 eggs. I'm just going to beat those until they're nice and loose. And then I'm going to add in about half a cup of milk and a half a cup of oil, and I'm going to beat that until well incorporated. This recipe doesn't require the creaming of butter and sugar since it uses no butter, so I'm choosing to use a hand whisk, but you can easily use a stand mixer or a hand mixer as well. Then I'm going to add in my vanilla extract, lemon juice, and lemon extract. I'm going to whisk that together to all combine. Do keep in mind you want to add your lemon juice and lemon extract last because if you mix it with your milk early, you would create buttermilk, and this recipe does not require buttermilk. I added my wet ingredients to my dry ingredients and I'm going to mix until there's no visible lumps. And then I'm going to prep 2 pans. So I have 2 6-inch pans here that I'm spraying with Pam, and then I'm going to line it with parchment paper that's cut into a 6-inch round. Since this cake is gluten-free, make sure you don't use the Pam or baking spray that includes flour. And then I'm going to just divide up my batter between my 2 pans. I like to use a large cookie scoop, and I'm going to put 4 scoops in each tin and then tap them on the counter to remove any air bubbles. You want to bake these cakes at about 350 degrees for 30 to 35 minutes. This recipe produced 2 sponges that were both about 1.5 inches tall, and so to have a nice tall cake, I decided to make a second batch to have 4 sponges and craft 4 layers of cake. On to the decoration. So for this cake, I am using a simple American buttercream that I dyed a light pink to make it more festive for the birthday girl. I piped a buttercream dam and then used about 3 tablespoons of lemon curd to fill my cake. I smoothed the curd out with the back of a spoon to make it nice and level, and then repeated the steps. I also added a simple syrup to my sponges just to make sure that they didn't dry out, and so I used probably a couple tablespoons per sponge. I thought that this homemade lemon curd would give the cake a nice punch, which is why I used it. You could also use store-bought lemon curd or just use regular buttercream to fill your cake. The fun thing about cakes is that everything is customizable. Now that I'm smoothing out my last layer of curd, it's time to pop the top on the cake and start with the crumb coat. So remember, a crumb coat is just a coat of frosting that you use to make sure all the crumbs stay on the first layer of cake so you have a nice smooth frosting on the outside. As I like to say, crumb coats don't have to be perfect, but they do need to be even. So I start with the top of my cake and I'm just going to smooth my frosting around using a angled spatula. You do want all of your sponge layers to have a thin layer of frosting, so as you can see, I'm moving the frosting around and scraping it down to make sure that all the sponges have some frosting on them. This is just going to make sure that my cake stays together when I go to put it in the fridge and then give it a final coat of frosting. The crumb coat phase is also the time you can kind of straighten out your cake if it's starting to lean to the left or right a little bit. If it's starting to lean, just pop your cake in the fridge for about 5 minutes or so and then use your spatula and your hands to just kind of straighten out that cake. I'm pretty happy with my crumb coat. I'm just going to do one last pass to make sure everything is nicely coated and then smooth out the top and then pop this in the fridge for at least 20 minutes to give the cake a nice hard set. When you pull your cake back out of the fridge, you should be able to touch your cake without the frosting getting on your hands. It should feel nice and firm. With that, it's time for my second layer of buttercream. Again, this is American buttercream, and I'm just going to start from the top as I did with the crumb coat and work my way down the cake, smoothing back and forth until all of my cake is covered. The buttercream I'm using is very soft. I added several tablespoons of milk to my American buttercream, which means it's going on really easily and it's going to smooth out really nicely. If your buttercream is too thick, you'll run into a couple of problems. One, it'll be really hard to smooth out your buttercream, which means you're going to have to add a lot of buttercream to cover your cake. And 2, you might even tear off pieces of cake because your buttercream, you're going to have to push so hard to get it to move, your cake can't hold up to that. I find buttercream with a thickness of peanut butter is too thick for me, so I like to thin it down to the consistency of mayonnaise or sour cream to get a nice even texture. If you think that your buttercream is too loose, you can always pop it back in the fridge for a couple of minutes, let it firm up, and then start frosting again. I have to admit, I'm usually part of that thick buttercream gang, and so this buttercream had me a little bit nervous. However, once I started using it, it was gliding on the cake, and I absolutely loved it. So if you find that you're having to work really hard to frost your cakes, I suggest adding a couple tablespoons of milk to thin it out, and that's going to make your decorating process go a lot smoother and a lot quicker. I'm adding another layer of buttercream to the top here because I find that when I smooth out my cakes, I smooth them at an angle. So I always have a super thin top and my base is super heavy with frosting. So I'm trying to correct that here by making sure I'm holding my bench scraper at 90 degrees and also adding more frosting to make it all even. By now, the buttercream I have on my cake is starting to set because I am frosting on a cold cake, which means it's time to switch up my technique. By using a hot bench knife and a hot spatula, I'm able to get a really smooth outer layer for the final layer of frosting for my cake. I heat up my tools using hot water, but you could also use a blowtorch, either would work. And once you're happy with your final coat, it's time to add the decoration. I'm decorating with a mixture of rainbow sprinkles, pink sugar, and some white pearls. And I'm using my palette knife to kind of push that into my cake. Honestly, this technique was a little frustrating because my sprinkles were going everywhere. Honestly, if you're going to use sprinkles, you need to kind of accept the fact you're going to be finding sprinkles for the next year. Because my cake was on such a large board, I thought this technique would be easier. However, it turned out not to be the case. So instead of using this technique and getting frustrated, I switched up to using my hand to cover the sides of the cake to get the sprinkles about halfway up. I then went back and hand placed sprinkles, some flowers, and some other pearls just to give it some more color, and here's that final look now. And now it's time for the swirls on top. I'm using a 1M temp just to give a couple of swirls, and this first swirl I wasn't sure about, so I took it off. Again, always the perk of decorating on a cold cake, you can remove the things that you don't like. I'm adding 8 swirls to the top of my cake to really jazz it up, and then I'm going to add the last of the sprinkles to really add some pops of color and make it feel incredibly festive for the birthday girl. If this were non-COVID times, I would have added some candles to the top to really make that birthday theme come alive. However, I think the added sprinkles really made it look festive and I think brought the birthday theme all the way. And with that, it's time to give my cake a final turn to look at the finished product. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and if it inspires you to make your own lemon cake, definitely tag me at Baking and Broadway. And if you like this video, you guys know what to do. Until next time!